So as a Christian in New Zealand, this may well be my most controversial subject of all, and the subject, given that this Saturday is Halloween, I want to talk about Halloween. Dear friends of mine from America have settled in New Zealand, and their first experience of the very different way that New Zealanders, certainly within Christian circles, think about Halloween was kind of brought home to them with a rather hefty thud when they suggested to their church as an idea to connect with the community that they host a Halloween festival. Our Christian attitude to Halloween, from what I've seen largely, now there's the official version in a way, as far as, a church. If I were to suggest to my church as pastor, I think we should have a Halloween festival, I would be howled down. However, if I were to talk individually one-on-one to different Christian families, I would discover that they and their children were quietly going out about the neighbourhood seeking the trick-or-treat thing, or at least they were allowing their children to do it, maybe going to friends' place to do it. So it's sort of at a bit of a distance, we didn't do Halloween, but look, the kids went out and did something. So there's definitely two realities going on for a lot of Christians. We can't be seen to be doing this because of what we think Halloween means, and certainly the way that the culture views Halloween. We can't be associated with that. But secretly, or at least quietly, privately, on the sly, or just, we let our children engage. We don't promote it, but now, the issue of how the culture views it is one thing and needs to be addressed. So, here you see a lot of costumes that have a lot to do with horror and what we might consider evil, whether it be ghosts, vampires, horrible characters from horror movies, all sorts of things that people might dress up. And of course, the Christians that I knew who would allow their children to celebrate would be insistent perhaps that, dress as a fairy, honey, don't go as a ghost. So trying to find the nice way around it. But there has been, for us at least, from our perspective, a sense in which Halloween celebrated evil and evil things. And from that perspective, certainly I can see why we don't like it and would keep Halloween away from our hallowed halls that we know of as churches, even if privately, as private citizens of New Zealand, we might quietly go and let our kids do it. And when churches have engaged with Halloween, what they've typically done is do a light party. So instead of celebrating darkness and evil, they have wanted to increase a sense of presence of the light, that the hope that we bring to communities anyway through Jesus Christ, using the same opportunity to present again the light that has come to dispel the darkness. So I could see again why that would be, why that's the response that some churches have gone down. And nevertheless, here's my controversial element. For one, of course, I have a historic perspective on Halloween, not an Americanized perspective. And from speaking to my American friends, I can see that quite clearly the way that Halloween is celebrated in America doesn't have the same vicious, dark overtones that we perceive them to be having here. It's got much more of a community neighborhood feel to it, where neighbors go door to door, engaging with one another and celebrating their community in a relatively sweet way. Actually, they're not Satanists, for crying out loud. Quite the opposite. And from that perspective, you can see why churches there would engage with it, because it would be a logical, natural thing. But the historic perspective on it is, there is an element of a, dare I say, pagan festival, and by that I mean a pre-Christian festival that from Celtic culture, where the new year was the 1st of November. And so the 31st of October, the day before, and going into winter, was seen as being a kind of a key spiritual transition time, where they believed the dead were closer to the living than at any other time of the year. And there's a lot of really reasons for that from a spiritual perspective, even from the fact that winter was, as a dark and cold and difficult season, was when more people would die naturally than any other time. So there was a sense in which death was closer to the community at that point. And one of the things that they did to acknowledge this transition is they put on big bonfires, right? So using the light to cast some protection around the community, drawing people to the bonfires. Now, at some point in history, a Catholic Pope decided that 1st of November would be considered All Saints' Day. And so priests and other people would dress up as saints and then go door to door or around the neighborhood celebrating the saints of their past. So Halloween literally means the eve before the hallowed day, so Hallows evening. And the 31st of October became the night before the celebration of All Saints' Day. And then became a connection between, we are celebrating the life and the passing of these great saints. And we're celebrating it in a way, acknowledging the perhaps in some cases the difficult martyrdom that they suffered to be acknowledged as saint, perhaps in some cases. But recognizing as well that our connection as living is still very connected to the dead, because we are who we are because of the lives that have passed. And saints are saints because they've passed the faith on to us, and sometimes they've suffered and died to do that. So celebrating their life also includes acknowledging their death and the debt we pay to the dead. Now, that's not an anti-Christian thing at all. We do it every Sunday when we take communion. We acknowledge the death of Christ has been the thing that we are now founded on. His life, absolutely, but certainly his death and resurrection. So we celebrate death every week around the communion table. And Halloween was a way of doing the same with on a broader scale in a different kind of way. It was a way of saying, we have a debt to pay to the dead. They are close to us. We can, at this time, acknowledge what we owe to them and celebrate their lives. Otherwise, we'd probably go on and forget them. And I'm sure that most of you don't remember saints in your daily ritual. I'm sure that most of us aren't sitting down thanking God for the saints who have suffered and died and passed the faith on to us. And by that, I don't mean just, the general history of Christians who have lived and died over 2,000 years, but sort of those kind of key spiritual heroes and those who have risen above, the general mass of Christians and done some extraordinary things. And maybe one of the few we might acknowledge within a Protestant realm would be Luther, for instance, and perhaps Calvin, people who have, by their strength of character and conviction, did some things to help the Christian movement stay true to its calling, true to its founder. And to acknowledge those lives and the debt that we owe to them is actually, I think, really important. And Halloween could be a time that we would do that, because that's what it was. That's what it was for. Sure, it's been changed a bit, but hasn't Christmas been changed too? Hasn't the celebration of Christ's birth been changed by our culture around us? But that doesn't mean we stop celebrating. It means that we celebrate all the more in the spirit in which we were supposed to celebrate, in order to help draw attention to what the true meaning of that day and that event and that season is. And certainly we as a church lean into Christmas for that very reason. We think it's a fantastic opportunity to reach our community on the story of Jesus Christ, on which Christmas is based on, so that they can see and hear the true story again and maybe even be warmed toward it. But here's the other thing. So if you celebrated Halloween simply on, let's remember some of the saints who we owe a debt to in order to say that we still have a faith now, then that would be a fantastic thing to do and would be appropriate and right, including remembering their dead and the way that they've died. The other element of it, which I think is where it could be really, really valuable for us as Christians, is the fact that actually the dark elements, or at least the shadowy side of it, might actually be the more important, or at least as important, to acknowledge and have a festival around, as opposed to another light party. So here's the thing about being a Christian. Sometimes it feels like you just can't be ever vulnerable or show that you've got some things in your life that you're not happy with. Maybe it's you're just more ambitious than you realize you should be, or more greedy than you realize that you should be. Maybe you're envious. Maybe you're one of those people who always looks at what others have and wishes you had it too. Maybe you're a gossip and you're just addicted to sharing other people's stories and always highlighting the worst sides of other people. Maybe you have an anger problem, and when things don't go your way, you just lash out, and maybe you're always just sort of reaching for more status than is helpful and healthy for you, and in doing so, you're pushing other people down. We've all got stuff, and reading the Psalms, those Psalms are full of people with stuff that they acknowledge openly before God. They're bringing their shadow side before God and saying, it's probably not true that when the psalmist says so-and-so is out to get me and then they're wrong and I'm right, it's probably not quite as clear as that, not quite clear cut. And certainly when the psalmist says, dash those babies' heads against the rock, that's not the good side of our human nature. That's anger and rage and deep frustration. That's measuring up all the horror that has been done to them as a people and wanting it to be inflicted on their enemy, the ones who did it to them. We could suppress that, or try, so that we can look like the good citizen, the good person, the one who's always on the higher moral ground, the one who's always got it all together, the one totally in control, the person who's dealt with their demons, who has no shadow side, everything is light. We could do that, in which case we're lying to others. We may even be lying to ourselves, and in which case we're pressing it down and creating a pressure cooker situation. Or we could say, there are times when it would be appropriate within a defined and say safe environment in order to say, sometimes I feel really angry. I get overwhelmed by my frustrations, and I just need an outlet. I need an outlet. I need a safe outlet. I need a way of acknowledging that everything in my life isn't perfect and pure, and there are some issues in my life. I'm haunted by some ghosts. I have some demons. There are times I just want to hurt. That we can play act that in a safe and small way in order to say, I've acknowledged it, but I don't want to live by that. I acknowledge it not so that I can embrace it or embody it for the rest of my life. I acknowledge it because only by confessing it can I bring it out to the open and say, Lord, deal with this. I wonder whether one of the reasons why we give treats to children who come to the door dressed as little ghouls and goblins and things is for the same reason that actually when we confess our sins, we're hoping to be blessed. Now, when I say blessed, I don't mean, wow, it's great that you've got an anger problem. I mean blessed as in forgiven, so that someone can say, I can see that you are struggling with anger, but I want to forgive you. I want to say that you are accepted and that your shadow side, the things that you bring, dark and light, are okay in this community. We will embrace you as a whole, not just the parts that we like about you, but actually the other parts that we don't like too. I wonder whether that's actually a key element in this whole process. None of the saints that we celebrate on All Saints' Day, if you ever celebrate All Saints' Day, are perfect. They all had their problems. They all had their issues. Luther and Calvin, not the least of those. They were pretty tortured individuals in their own way. And yet, it's the whole person that we embrace when we embrace people in the church. We don't just embrace the good parts that they show us. In embracing someone as a Christian, we say, I embrace the dark and the light in you. I cannot be selective when I embrace and love you. In the same way that God is not selective when he embraces and loves us. He says, I accept you as you are. Now, I might not want to leave you as you are. I want to help you grow. But if we don't accept one another with our lights and darks, then we're not accepting us fully. We're not fully accepted. And we will always feel that as a scar in our soul, worrying and wondering when the next thing that we do, if it's not the perfect thing, not the good citizen moment, but in fact an expression of our sort of clamped down rage and anger about the injustices that we face in this world, or the hurts and the pains that we're dealing with, if that comes out in an uncontrolled moment when it just something happens and we just snap, we're always going to worry that that moment will be the final moment that we have an acceptance in a church. That's what worries me about light parties. Not that celebrating light's bad, but the fact that we cannot ever acknowledge shadows. We're not allowed to, let's face it, our communities, our societies, our world is wonderfully good at celebrating and acknowledging broken hearts. We have songs about broken hearts. We sing about it cathartically to express it, acknowledge it, in order to be healed of it. But there are no broken heart songs, very few broken heart songs. I should acknowledge that there are some, very few broken heart songs that we sing on a Sunday morning. And when we have a chance to celebrate the brokenness of our being, that we are haunted by ghosts, that sometimes we're goblins, and that even we act like vampires when we suck life out of other people for our own sake, whether by the rich sucking the life out of the poor to stay rich and get richer, that's vampiric. There are elements of our society that are embodied or at least expressed in some sort of metaphoric way by these demons that we are demonizing. But they're us. They are us. We have those elements in us. But we're not allowed to acknowledge it, not able to say in a safe environment, here's part of me that I don't like, but you know what? It's still part of me. And I need a blessing. I need a forgiving. I need an embracing. I need a, you're okay, bring it all in. There's no way to heal the goblin in me unless someone says, I love you anyway, goblin and all. Well, those are my thoughts on Halloween. I'm not sure how you're going to celebrate it this year, if at all. If you're already against it, then you're probably not going to celebrate it, and that's fine. And if you've got some thoughts to throw out there, some reflections, some other observations, happy to hear them. I've heard some pretty kooky things that people have shared about what they think Halloween means, so just do a little bit of research before you throw some stuff out there, because I've heard some pretty wacky stuff that just even a quick search would dispel pretty quickly. Anyway, God bless you. Be well. I've been me, you've been you, and maybe we'll see each other soon. Cheers.